sounds like a person has to be highly vigilant in order to flush out the iodine in the system.
At first, but it's not a hard thing. And thankfully, in terms of just briefly personal care products, when I wrote the book, I spent a lot of time looking at just popular products and scouring ingredient labels. I would say that about, a third or a quarter of products are problematic. Most aren't. It's very easy to work around that one. And then in terms of dietary sources, all the food categories have safe options. So whatever, you don't have to be, restrictive or carnivore or something like that. You got a lot of food options. Once you figure out how to work around some of those big pitfalls, it's not hard.
Mm-hmm. So what are the alternatives for the grains and dairy?
Well, so for grains, again, just distinction. It's not the grains per se, it's commercial products. So anything you're not buying pre-baked, even if it's like flour product, even just flour itself, you can bake anything at home. You can cook up rice. You can, it's not grains per se. It's just the commercial processing.
It's the baked grain products.
Well, and commercially baked.
Commercially baked, yes.
You bake them at home, it's not a factor.
Yeah. And the dairy, for example, I love raw dairy, from a raw farm. I assume that there's not going to be excessive amount of iodine it depends on how they were processing or how they were cleaning the cows.
Yeah, I've seen limited assays on non-commercial products. I've seen a handful of assays on organic products. Organic dairy is often a bit lower, like 30% lower. But in terms of the goals and the targets, I think about two stages to that. In the book, I talked about like a reset stage and a maintenance stage. So the reset stage is where you want to fix things and you want to get below that 100 microgram level. So that's something that's not forever, but for that period of time, you would want to avoid foods that can contain even moderate amounts of iodine. And that would include organic dairy. I haven't seen assays on raw. I don't know why it would be different per se. One could assay it. I just haven't seen that available.
All right. I guess for more tips, then they should read your book, right?
Yeah, this is the one prior. This was the Thyroid Reset Diet. And the story that I'm sharing with you was one that, like you said, hasn't really come out, is important. It compelled me to write the book. I spent about a year and a half just pouring through medical literature to pull this together. And it's a real strong story that this is what drives it. And this is also a way to help it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe you can share some of the stories that you've seen in patients when they are getting on this reset diet. What happened to them?
Funny thing is that most people that I've seen clinically were on thyroid medication. So it's always good when they're working with someone who's tracking them closely. The main pitfall is that many who aren't being tracked well suddenly do not need their medication. And it's suddenly too much for them because their thyroid starts working again rather promptly. So that's a common issue. But yeah, a large percent of people can come off of medication. And even funny thing I've seen is that even those who lack a thyroid and do need medication long-term, there's ways by which extra iodine makes their body resist thyroid hormone. So peripherally, they don't absorb the hormone as well. So a lot of folks who will always need medication find that they need less and they do better on what they need.
Oh, that's fascinating. So the iodine not only affecting the thyroid gland, but also affecting how other cells are responding to thyroid hormones.
We call this a peripheral metabolism. Yeah, there's a big group of deiodinase enzymes, a big group of phase 2 conjugating compounds by the liver, a big range in cellular receptor activity, cell membrane permeability, gut metabolism. There's tons of things that the body adjusts to make it all right. And too much iodine, it engages basically a fuse. Too much of it blows the fuse and your body fights it. Your body resists thyroid hormone.
What about Hashimoto's? So have you seen really good results? What about the antibodies? Were they able to come back to normal?
Yeah. So like the study I mentioned, most all people can reverse autoimmune thyroid disease. The study showed, 78%. I see similar results clinically. Hashimoto's, funny thing, most hypothyroidism is Hashimoto's. About half of people with Hashimoto's do not have measurable antibodies. So a common thing doctors will say is, oh, their antibodies are negative, they don't have Hashimoto's. It doesn't work that way. Negative antibodies doesn't rule out Hashimoto's. And the funny thing is that thyroid antibodies can affect a lot of symptoms directly, and they can be strongly tied to iodine levels. In the case, the two antibodies we measured, there's 4 measurable antibodies, 2 that we talk about the most, antithyroid globulin and antithyroid peroxidase. So thyroid peroxidase, that's the enzyme that oxidizes iodide into iodine. It makes iodine, basically. And thyroid globulin is a template on which iodine attaches. So it's directly linked to each of those. The odd thing about the antibodies is they have the least effect they have is upon the risk of thyroid disease. They have a very small correlation with someone's risk of developing overt thyroid disease.
Wow. Okay, but that's the marker we use. And so do you think they're faulty markers?
No, it's a marker that's relevant for symptoms, precise numbers. So those that have antibodies greater than 500, both of them up greater than 500, their 9-year risk of overt thyroid disease is about 3%. If someone has negative antibodies, their 9-year risk of overt hypothyroidism is about 1%. So yeah, over the course of many years, you see a difference, but it's not what people think. It's not as big of a driver as you would expect. But but what people don't think is that it does cause other problems. So the antibodies do directly cause a lot of symptoms that are blamed for being thyroid symptoms.
Just the elevated antibody themselves is causing.
They cause infertility, they cause heart disease, they raise the risk for autism in pregnant women, they cause weight gain, they cause low quality of life, they cause marked edema in the body. So they do a lot. And those are all things I mentioned with normal thyroid function. So before any changes to the thyroid, they alone can do all of that.
Yeah. So just